go ahead.
Okay. Welcome to Reality Coaching for Writers. If you notice, somebody's missing today. Eddie Jones is in Europe, enjoying a vacation in Italy, and some welcome R&R for he and Benny. And today we have Zena Dell Lowe with us, who we always love having on board. And she is going to help us with enriching our characters. Tell us, Zena, there's a problem, right?
There is a problem. Thank you so much for having me back. I love being on your show. And yes, one of the things that I'm passionate about talking to writers about is the common problem that I keep seeing in a lot of material, which is that there are still so many passive characters. And people don't know that they've created a passive character. Most of the time, the writers I tell this to, once I've critiqued their work, they're like, well, I thought I had them being active. So what am I doing wrong? How do I know if they're being active? So I created a list of ways that you can test whether or not your character is actually driving the action of the story. Now, before I get into that list, Diana, let me just say this. The reason it is so important that your character be the one who is driving the action of the story is because there's nothing new under the sun. All stories have a similar flow, really, a similar structure, a similar arc, even in a lot of ways. There's a lot of similarities. What makes your story unique is who the character is that it's happening to. So that's one reason why it's essential that your main character drive the action of the story, because that's how your story becomes unique and personal and special, and that's how it hooks the audience and keeps them connected emotionally to your main character, which, as you know, is essential. But also, yeah, yay, right? But also, it's essential that your main character drive the action of the story, because if they don't change. They don't grow. They don't learn anything. They're just cosmic yahoos that things keep happening to, which we don't believe, by the way, in our worldview. Right. We believe we have agency. So your main character must have agency. They must make choices. It's actually one of the fundamental ways that we reflect a Christian worldview, is by making sure our main character is driving the action, because that means they can make choices. And sometimes those choices can be wrong, but at least they got to make them.
Well, so tell us, what are some of the ways we can test that?
Okay. So one of the ways that you can test whether or not that you have an active main character, the person that is actually driving the action of the story, is that they're the ones that make the decisions. They're the ones that are deciding what to do. So, for example, I recently critiqued a story by a gentleman who had 5 different storylines going on. And so in each of those storylines, he needed to make sure that the main character of that particular story was the one who was making things happen. And yet, in this one particular storyline, it was always his wife, the character's wife, that had the ideas. She was the one saying, well, why don't you do this? And I'll go do this. Well, why don't you go do this? And I'll go do this. But that meant that she is the one driving the action, because she's the one making the decisions and the choices. And so I told him, you needed to switch that. You need to flip that. Yeah. He's the one who has to come to her and say, hey, honey, I want to do this, but I think you should go do this. And now all of a sudden, he's the one who's making the decisions. Good. So you have to look at that and see, is your main character the one who's deciding what action steps to take? Now, it might be that another character comes around and says, you should go do this, I'm going to do this. And then your character says, no. Or maybe your character actually says, sure, I'll go do that. But then goes and does something else. That means they're still the one driving the action of the story. For example, sometimes you might have a character that is under orders, or that has a higher up telling him what to do. And that has to be done according to, the big boss and the dictates that he's handed down. And your character might have to agree to do those things, but then he has to have his own ideas about how to do things and probably do something a little different than he's been instructed, or else we're just not going to find it very interesting.
Right. And there's nothing worse than boring characters, right?
There's nothing worse than a boring, passive character.
Yes.
We get excited when people make bold choices,
Mhm.
which actually brings us to number 2. Your main character drives the action of the story when they make choices that are attached to high stakes.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is they should be the one, this is how you test if they're the one driving the action of the story. They're the one that has something to lose if it goes wrong. They're the one that has the potential, all the weight of the world on their shoulders. They're the one who, if the marriage fails, it's going to be their fault because they made the wrong choice. If the building blows up, it's going to be their fault because they made the wrong strategic choices. If they get the girl or don't get the girl, because it's a romantic comedy, if they fail, it's going to be because they made the wrong choices. So at the end of the day, you have to test who is the one who has something to lose. And if your main character doesn't have enough game, or what do you say? If your main character doesn't have enough
Stake in the game.
Skin in the game, that's the phrase
Yeah,
I'm
skin in the
looking
game.
for.
Yeah.
If they don't have enough skin in the game, then it's just not important enough to even include in the story.
Right. Yeah.
It
Makes
needs
sense.
to be cut. Yeah.
Like
Good.
that.
All right. So they're the ones, number 2, they're the ones with something to lose.
I'm taking notes. Get the
Oh,
pen and
yay.
paper, everybody. Yeah.
Yay, yay. Okay. Shall I continue?
Yes, please. This is great.
Okay. So number 3, they're the ones who notice things. They're the ones who pick up the clues. And this doesn't mean just if you're writing some sort of detective story or mystery or whatever, like they're cops. I mean, your main character has to notice things. So if you're writing a romance, your main character is the one that notices that when Barbara is talking to Theodore, she makes a slight grimace with her face, that there's distaste there, that there's something about this dynamic that isn't good. But your main character notices. Your main character notices if this other person comes in and they're the life of the party and everybody loves them, but they notice that they have mud on their shoes and that they have calluses on their hands and something is off in this high society situation. I mean, even if they're not a detective, but in a way, I'm saying your main character needs to be a mini detective. Always. It doesn't matter the genre. It doesn't matter. They're the ones who notice things. And
now you just help me out. Did you just describe Rhett Butler with Scarlett O'Hara?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Because he noticed.
He
was the main character and he noticed. Yeah.
That her hands were bad. Yep, that's right. She had calluses. She was not the society lady she thought, or that she was proposing to be. But notice too, what happens in this is that when your character is the one who's noticing things, by extension, that means they have to be making correct sense out of it. They can't just notice it and then be really confused and dumb about it. Like if they notice it, they have to kind of put the clues together and get insight that nobody else can get, which of course needs to be part of their superpower, because every main character has a superpower to notice things that other people don't. So you have to figure that out. All right. So that's number
I love that.
3, which is they're the ones picking up on the clues. They're the ones that are noticing things. I think I can do, I have way more. I have like 10 on this list, but I think I could maybe do 2 more in the time that we have allotted.
Okay, great. So, I'm enjoying this.
Oh, good, good, good. Okay, number 4. And this one's a little different, maybe a little challenging in some ways, but it happens in every story, all right? So they're the ones putting the team together. They're the ones recruiting the allies. They're the ones who are going out and bringing in the players that they need to accomplish whatever he or she needs. Now, this is true no matter the genre, again. So it's obvious, we see this at play obviously in certain types of genres. For example, the Mission Impossible movies.
Right.
Obviously, Tom Cruise is the main character as Ethan Hunt, and he puts together a team. He has his team. These are his inside people that he would die for. And they each bring to the table a special skill that enhances what Ethan is able to do.
Mm-hmm.
But he's the one who identifies them. So when they have their heroic moment of saving the day because of their special superpower, ultimately Ethan gets the credit for that because he identified who the right people were to bring on board his team. But let's put this in another genre. Let's say it's a romantic comedy or some sort of romance. Now, all of a sudden, the guy who's going after this girl and he really, really wants her, he might have to recruit his best friend, or he might even recruit his cranky next door neighbor because he has a plan and he needs that character to play a role. He might recruit his mentor who has a dog, or the dog walker of that dog for a particular role that he needs them to play in his scheme or in his plan to try to get the girl. He's the one who sees the players that he needs and identifies them and brings them on board. So the reason this is important, I recently read another script where it was sort of it was a fantasy story. But in that, it was like the main character had found themselves in this fantastic world, had found the leader of that particular world and was trying to figure out, what is going on? What is this? And the leader of that world was the one who was saying, you should really, I think you need to meet so-and-so down here. They're going to give you some insight about what maybe you could do. And you know who else? Hey, let's get so-and-so, da-da-da-da-da. And so it was the leader of the world that was making all these connections and suggestions. And so I told the author, you need to flip that. You need to, maybe what happens is while they're having this big heated, tense meeting and, the big wig of that world is trying to decide whether or not to kill or not kill your main character, maybe somebody comes in and whispers in the guy's ear and then the main guy of that world is like, well, what is Glorastes doing here? I told him I didn't want to hear from him for another 2 months but tell him I'll be with him shortly. And then our character picks up on that and says, Glorastes, he's the master carver, is he not? He's the one that made the such and such down in such and such. I was thinking that would be a good way for you to prepare against this war from so-and-so, is if you did some carving of this, I could talk to him for you. Or something. I mean, I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along. But the point is, your character has to be the one that sees the people, sees the players, and sees how they could be useful to his plan. And the catch about this is that he can't use people. That is the catch. And that's one of the challenges of how to effectively pull it off. But that's where friendship comes in. That's where you build trust. Or sometimes it is to use them because that's the only way he can survive. But in the process of doing that, he's got to get some dirt on the other person to force them to do his bidding. Maybe it's ugly work he has to do to try to, coerce this other person to do this part of his plan or else. But at the end of the day, there's got to be some sort of respect that comes out of that, or some sort of trade, or he's got to be honorable at the end of it. Once that other person fulfills it, he actually follows through on what he agreed to do or whatever. I mean, so there can be some bad stuff there depending on the genre. But for the most part, we want to make sure that the main character isn't just using people like objects, but he values the people that are in his life. And so his recruitment of them is to ask for their help to do the right thing. It's the difference between being blackmailed and being recruited.
Mm,
So we
big
have
difference.
yeah, big difference.
Well, so just in that description that you shared with us, you had the character noticing, and then you had them making a decision to have a conversation, and then the whole objective with the goal in mind was still on the main character's mind. So,
and the stakes were high because maybe his
yeah,
life is at stake.
okay, yeah,
So
all
you're
right,
right. In one scene that I just made up off the top of my head, all four of those things are at play.
right, yeah, right.
Well done. Well done.
What else do you have for us in your
Okay.
list of hits?
Let's see. I'm gonna say the last one, like I'm trying to pick and choose from the ones that I have. Boop, boop, boop. They are the ones who are influencing. Let me say that again. They are the ones who are influencing the events of that world, even if they're not in charge.
Okay.
That's a really big one and a really difficult one to pull off, especially if they're not in charge.
Mm.
But this does go along with the example I gave in the beginning, where the number one thing is they have to be the one making the decisions, right? They have to be the one deciding what to do. Well, that's how they influence the world. So even if they've been given a direct order, if they do something in defiance of that, that's essential. Or maybe they follow the order directly, and yet then they do something different that the other person does not suspect, or they go above and beyond it. You like to have the blackmail information ready, and nobody expected that. There's a twist to it. But the idea is that they are the ones who are influencing the events of that world, even if they're not in charge. And a really good example of this is Maverick, the sequel of Top Gun. So Maverick, part of the character flaw of Maverick is that he's not good at taking orders. That's why he's still a captain after all these years. He is not advanced in the hierarchy of the military. However, he's still the best damn the best damn pilot the world has ever seen, right? He's still Maverick. Right. He's amazing. So what happens at the very beginning is we're about to see him. He's involved in this testing thing. And then the orders come down from the brass. We're killing this program. We're going to take all the money. We're going to put it in drones. You had your chance. You didn't meet the requirements, the Mach 11 or whatever they were supposed to meet. I've only seen the show once, so forgive me if I'm getting my details wrong. But so, just cease and desist. And we're, the general is coming right now, and we're going to tear this thing apart. And what does he do? He says, well, he's not here yet. So he gets in, he tells everybody, let's do it. Let's do it right now. But we're not ready to do it. Let's do it. And he's taking a huge risk. And here's the thing. What makes him extra heroic in this is that he's actually not doing it for himself. He's doing it because all of those people are going to lose their jobs if they pull this program. Either way, he is screwed. If he does it, he's going to get court-martialed probably for defying a direct order. But everybody under him is safe. So, and if he doesn't do it, he's out anyway. So what does he have to lose? He figures, I'll take the risk so I can save those people, and maybe their jobs will be safe. Because they'll have to now continue the program because they will have reached the goal that they said that they would reach, even though they're being asked to do it sooner. So he's the one influencing the events of that world, even though he's not the one in charge. That's where you have to get creative. This happens again later. It's actually quite remarkable how this happens. Later in the story, he is told that he's fired, basically. He's let go. They're going to go forward with this mission without him. And now he doesn't even have access to these kids. He's off campus and he's with his love interest. And now the person that has always protected him, Val Kilmer, is dead. He's got no options, nobody who's going to interfere for him. And he even says to Jennifer Connelly, he says, I don't know what to do. And she says, well, you're going to have to figure out a way to get their attention or to, whatever. And so what does he do? He goes back. Once again, he breaks the law, gets in the plane himself, and shows them that it can be done. He does what he's been trying to train them all to do that nobody could do. He needs to show them that it can be done. And then at the end of that, he has another potential fate. Will he be court-martialed for that? Or will he be put in charge of the mission because he is so good and he can lead his team to do it? And so the point is, he's the one influencing the events of the world, even though he's been ordered to stand down.
So that's the trick. It's checking so many of the boxes on an active character that you just described for us. Yeah. He's making the decisions, and the minor character, Jennifer, you said, she even said, you've got to make a decision. You've got to, so supporting character.
Yes. And notice she says that, but she doesn't give him the idea. You know what you should do? You should go get in that plane and show him that it can be done. All she does, she's there to encourage him. You've got to come up with something. So he takes that, and he's the one that comes up with the solution, which is the key. He's got to be the one making the choices, seeing the connection, seeing what's possible, and hopefully doing it for heroic reasons.
That's such a great distinction right there, having it back on your character and not coming from someone else. That's so good. Excellent.
Yeah, and I think it's important because a lot of times in story, you'll have a character who is down and out, and that's okay. They can go to another person for encouragement, for comfort, for, even reprimand, for whatever it is that they think they need. They can go to that character, and that character can give them something, the swift kick in the butt that they need to take the next step, or to tell them to stop being a baby, stop pouting, stop having a pity party. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? So that other character can say that, but then it's got to be our main character who figures out what the next step should be. And that's what makes them the lead. So anyway.
I was just thinking of The Hobbit in Lord of the Rings. And in the end, everybody turned back, but he found it within himself to complete the mission.
Yes, now that's an interesting one, because there is a moment right there where Sam Gamgee gets to be the hero. But here's the reason this goes back to what we just talked about. Sam Gamgee, Frodo gets the credit for that heroic moment because Frodo is the reason Sam Gamgee is there. And Sam has been a faithful friend, but he hasn't had the heroic moment. And by the way, anytime you recruit a team, every team member has to have one moment of heroism, one moment where their unique skills, whatever it is that they bring to the table, why they have been recruited, that they get to shine. And this was Sam Gamgee's moment where Frodo cannot go on. And Sam says, I'll get you to the edge. And he says, you can't carry the ring, Sam. And he says, I know, but I can carry you.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
It makes me emotional every time. It's just so beautiful.
Exactly. Yeah.
But Frodo ultimately gets the credit for that because he was the reason Sam was there. He recruited him, and this is why Sam is there. Yeah. This is why you cannot do things like this outside of friendship, because sometimes you need somebody to carry you. And so it doesn't take away from Frodo in that moment, even though it's at the climax. It actually proves that Frodo had a good reason to bring him all along. And Sam came through. It's his moment of heroism.
Yes. It's great. Great. Yay. Well, Zena, now you are off to the Florida Christian Writers Conference tomorrow, right?
I am indeed. I am.
Now, what are you going to be teaching there?
Okay, so I'm going to be teaching a continuing class where we're going to start with story structure, and then we're going to go to character development, and then we're going to go to visual images. And it's all Hollywood storytelling tools adapted for fiction writers, for novelists. I love
Excellent.
it. I think it's so much fun, and it's so enlightening for a lot of the people that come.
Oh, I remember years ago um, at the Florida conference coming in and sitting in on your class and taking notes and bringing it back and copying them out for all my fiction clients because it
Wow.
was so fabulous. And so I asked permission from you, and you granted me permission to share it with my clients. And I don't know how many of them really, saw the value that I recognized in what you do and what you bring. And that's why Eddie and I love to have you on here, Zena, because um, we just so appreciate, getting those nuances that you bring to writers, fiction novelists, but also screenwriters. And so we just appreciate you so much. Now you've
Thank you.
been a screenwriter, producer, you've acted, so you really have an idea of what looking at these things from so many different angles. And I think that's the value that you bring is because you've walked in so many of those shoes. You've worn so many of those
I
hats,
have.
like you
I've
wear
worn a
your
lot of hats.
hats.
I have. And
Yeah.
really what I love about teaching is that you really learn when you teach. Most of what I know has come from trying to articulate what isn't working to various students or clients.
Mm,
Because sometimes I'll know something's not working, but I won't necessarily know why until I work it out and then try to explain it. And
mm-hmm.
then it's a light bulb that goes off and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is huge. This is a principle. Why didn't I know this before?" And it was
Yeah.
really really neat. Like for example, recently with Susie May Warren, we had a session where she had I was critiquing her screenplay, her first screenplay. And she was doing technically everything correct as in her introduction of her characters, and yet it wasn't working. Like she was showing the male and what he was doing, and then she'd show the female and what she was doing, but then she would cut away to the next thing. And I realized in that moment, I'm like, well, there's no reason to cut away because nothing happened in the scene. There was no
Oh,
moment that forwarded the scene. So there's got to be an emotional shift in the scene. So if you're showing the girl studying her research to try to find the key to the particular case she's working on as a lawyer, the only time you can cut away is when she has that aha moment where she says, "Oh," and she gets the idea. Now you can cut away because she went from just studying the material to there's something here. And if you're in the kitchen with this guy and he's cooking and he's in a good mood, you don't cut away on that. You cut away when his mom calls, and then he either lights up at that, and that shows us his relationship with his mom, or he cringes. But either way, there's an emotional shift in the scene
mm-hmm.
as he works his way up. "Hello, mom," and we cut away. And so it's an interesting thing. I didn't know that I knew that until I tried to teach it and explain it.
Explain it.
And it's such a good principle. So anyway, all that to say, I think that teaching has been probably the best thing I've ever done
Mm.
as a writer because it's taught me so much about the craft. And I just love to, pass that on to other people.
Well, we appreciate you so much. And so we're going to put in the description box below, we'll put all the ways you can connect with Zena. The way I enjoy is on Storyteller's Mission on her YouTube channel.
Yay.
And I love your reels. I love the way you're becoming a reel master.
Well, thank
And
you. We're
yeah.
working on it.
It's very good. And I love those little clips. I can, it's something I can send to somebody when I know they're busy and they don't have a lot of time, but it's such a good nugget that you share in those reels. So I highly recommend it. Eddie and I do, and we appreciate you. And thanks again for coming on Reality Coaching for Writers.
Thanks for having me.
We'll talk soon. Are you going to